The wrought iron gate, shaped with swirling Baroque patterns, creaked open with a heavy sound that echoed through the silent garden like an omen. The Whitmore estate, once alive with laughter, now held only the whisper of wind rustling through clusters of maple leaves on a gloomy autumn afternoon. Daniel Whitmore, 40. A 40-year-old billionaire founder of a multinational tech empire stepped out of his sleek black Bentley without waiting for the chauffeur to open the door. He had come back earlier than expected. No one knew, no announcement, not a single prior notice. His polished leather shoes touched the marble floor, just as cold and sharp as his gaze, though faintly tinged with a sorrow that had long since become second nature. His hand gripped the suitcase tightly, but his eyes froze at the grand foyer. Leo. The 6-year-old boy was slumped on the floor beneath the grand spiral staircase. His tiny arms curled around his head like bracing for an oncoming storm. Beside him was a woman, a slender figure, long curly hair, tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Eyes dark as a stormy night, bending down, holding Leo's hand. In her other hand was a white cloth, stained with clear streaks of red. Blood. The suitcase dropped to the floor with a sharp, hollow thud. Imani Daniel strode toward them, his voice cutting through the air, cold and razor-sharp. "Let go of my son. Right now." Imani. Brooks flinched, releasing Leo's hand as if shocked by electricity. The boy sprang up and ran into his father's arms, sobbing in choking gasps, clinging to him like the last lifeline in a flood. He was bleeding. Imani began, but Daniel cut her off. "You think the blood on your hands is normal?" His voice wasn't loud, but each word dropped like a coffin nail. His steel-gray eyes scanned the swelling on his son's forehead, then flicked to the cloth in her hand, filled with everything a man who had once lost his wife could imagine: pain, rage, and a paralyzing fear called not again. He slipped in the bathroom. I was cleaning the wound. Imani stayed calm, but how her hand gripped the back of her dress betrayed the tremble rising inside her. Slipped. Or was he thrown against the wall? Daniel stepped closer, suspicion burning in his eyes. Or did he do something that made you snap? She swallowed hard but held his gaze. "I didn't do anything. I never have. And I never will. Enough." Daniel raised his hand, silencing every word. "Not another word. Get out of my house, as far from my son as possible." Imani went still. A heavy silence draped over the three of them. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She took one step back, then another, until her shadow vanished through the grand doorway. A few minutes later, holding Leo in his arms, Daniel walked silently to the car and headed straight to the hospital. The boy buried his face in his father's chest, eyes red and lips pressed tight, as if swallowing something too painful to say aloud. Inside, Daniel's fury still blazed, but beneath it lay another feeling, vague, weary, and cold. Just like the day he lost Rebecca. One moment, one mistake, one person gone forever. Sometimes a misunderstanding needs only a glance to begin, but a lifetime to mend. If you've ever experienced a moment when fear replaced trust, leave a comment. If you want to follow this story to its end, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a little understanding. Because sometimes the only thing that can truly heal is being fully seen, even when the heart is full of cracks. The VIP clinic at St. Haven Hospital was tranquil. Despite its modern design in elegant shades of white and gold, the silence that blanketed the room amplified every slight sound tenfold. The faint hum of the air conditioner, the rustling of medical charts, the soft clinking of a syringe against a metal tray. Everything seemed to stretch the space between the two people seated across from each other. Daniel sat in a leather chair, still holding Leo in his arms. The boy was no longer crying, but neither was he smiling. His eyes were puffy and red, avoiding contact like a small animal that had just weathered a storm and wasn't sure if the next downpour was moments away. A pediatrician entered the room. She was a woman in her middle years, her gaze gentle, yet sharp enough to detect something unusual when she saw the swelling on Leo's forehead. The injury isn't deep, just a surface abrasion. No stitches needed. But this isn't the first time. Daniel looked up, stunned. "What do you mean?" The doctor held up a CT scan and pointed to the soft tissue around the boy's temple. "There's evidence of a previous bruise that healed less than 2 weeks ago, and a tiny scar on his shoulder blade, not consistent with a typical fall. Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry to be blunt, but are you certain your son hasn't been abused?" Daniel went numb for a moment. The thought had never crossed his mind, until now. The image of Imani holding that blood-stained cloth suddenly felt much heavier in his mind. She had looked frightened, but was it because she was caught, or because she truly hadn't done anything wrong? "May I speak to him alone?" Daniel asked, his voice dropping lower. The doctor nodded and stepped out, leaving the room again in silence. He leaned down to look at his son in his arms. Leo was fidgeting with his thumb eyes drifting elsewhere, a look Daniel knew all too well. Rebecca used to call it the look of children hiding something. "Leo, look at me." The boy slowly complied. "Tell me what happened." "It's okay. I won't be angry." Leo pressed his lips together. His small chest rose and fell. 1 second. 2. Then 3. Silence. "Miss Imani." "She didn't hit me." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. "Then why did you say that?" Leo looked down, his long lashes casting shadows like the weight of guilt slipping off his lips. "I broke Mommy's vase. The blue one. I was running in the hallway, and I fell." Daniel knew that vase. Rebecca had loved it, a gift from her late mother. He had kept it as a piece of memory, something to hold on to after losing his wife. "I thought you'd be mad. Mad. Like the time you got angry when I played with your pen on the white sofa. Miss Imani came in right then. So I..." Daniel froze. "You said she hit you. To get out of trouble." Leo nodded, his little hands clenched into fists. "I'm sorry. I didn't want Miss Imani to get kicked out, but was scared." A searing silence tore through Daniel's chest. Not because his son had lied, but because he had felt the need to lie to feel safe. Every word Leo uttered was like a blade twisting into the heart of a father who had believed himself strong enough to protect his son, but had not been gentle enough to make him feel unconditionally loved. He gently pulled the boy close, holding him tightly. The scent of his son's hair, warm and soft, was like an unspoken forgiveness. "I'm not mad. I'll never be angry when you tell me the truth." Leo sniffled into his chest, and Daniel closed his eyes. A father who had just lost a part of his moral compass is now rediscovering it through his son's confession. In that moment, an image of Imani appeared in his mind. Not the woman caught in the act, but the one who had stayed up on feverish nights with Leo, the one who sang soft soul lullabies to his son, while he buried himself in back-to-back meetings. He hadn't asked. He had judged. He condemned her based only on what he feared, not what he knew. And now the consequence was a small lie from a child, but the most incredible truth yet about his own heart. Imani Brooks set her teacup down on the porcelain saucer so gently that it made no sound. Even so, her hands trembled slightly, not from the heat, but from exhaustion. Exhaustion so profound that even the sharp pain in her back from sitting on the old wooden chair in her temporary apartment no longer bothered her. The small rented room in the Bronx was barely 30 square meters. A warm yellow light from the desk lamp cast a soft glow over a framed photo of her mother, The woman who once taught her how to tie a headscarf every Sunday morning, who used to say kindness is a choice, not a debt others owe you. And Imani Brooks had chosen kindness for years. But it seemed kindness wasn't enough. 3 days had passed since she was thrown out of the Whitmore estate. No messages, no explanation. No one had called except the HR representative from the agency that employed her, who said, "We're placing your contract on temporary suspension pending investigation." Investigation! She scoffed silently, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. They didn't need an investigation. Everything had already been decided the moment a white man stood in the grand foyer and saw her holding a bloody towel next to his son. In that instant, all the quiet biases of society were poured out in a single look. There was no need to scream, "You're black," or "You're just the help." All it took was suspicion at the right moment, and someone like her would be shown the door without another word. She had grown used to that. But never before had it hurt quite like this. Imani stood and stepped onto the small balcony. It overlooked a concrete yard where neighborhood kids were kicking a soccer ball. She missed Leo not because of the job, but because of the boy. She missed how he climbed onto a chair to help her bake cookies, the wide-eyed wonder when she told him stories about Harriet Tubman, and the innocent giggles she carried him on her shoulders. Leo had been the only light left in that cold house Daniel Whitmore called a home. And now, she no longer belonged there. 2 gentle knocks on the door broke her thoughts. She turned. It was Mrs. Karen, the landlady, a widowed woman who once called her the babysitter with the saddest eyes on this block. "There's someone here to see you. A man. Looks famous." Imani froze. A strange feeling rose like a tide. Mrs. Karen stepped aside, and less than 10 seconds later, the tall figure appeared in the doorway. Still in his perfectly tailored dark suit, the smug confidence she had seen before was gone. This time, he entered like a man walking on shattered glass. "Daniel." Their eyes met for a moment. She didn't look away, but she didn't greet him either. He spoke first, his voice soft like wind brushing through the first night of winter. "I'm sorry." Imani said nothing. She quietly poured a glass of water, set it on the table, and sat across from him as if hosting a guest. "No more. No less." Leo told the truth. He was scared, and "I didn't verify anything. I didn't let you speak. I only saw the blood. And then you saw a black woman standing beside your son. So you concluded." Imani's words were calm. Not sharp, not fragile, just cold, like the truth itself. Daniel stopped. Nothing from his Ivy League education, his years as a CEO in sky-high towers, or his million-dollar negotiations had prepared him for this moment when a woman looked him in the eye and named the thing he had spent a lifetime avoiding. "Imani, I'm not a racist. You're not the spokesperson for not racist Daniel. If you have to say it out loud, you may let it live inside you without knowing." Imani stood and walked toward the window, where the streetlights cast a soft glow on her face. She didn't cry. Tears were something she had shed for others, never for herself. "I lived in that house not to be the trustworthy black help. I was there because I loved a child and believed I could do something good. But kindness doesn't protect you from prejudice. You didn't ask me anything. You judged me because of an image, a moment, a bloody towel." Daniel had no words. He was once a man unafraid of silence, but this wasn't the silence of power. This was the silence of someone who had been wrong and didn't yet know how to make it right. "I'm not coming back, Daniel. Not because I'm angry, but because I know this, if something like that happens again, I'll be the first one pushed out." Her voice held no bitterness, only the calm resolve of someone who knew her worth and no longer needed anyone else to validate it. Daniel stood. He wanted to say something, but Imani's eyes had already refused every explanation. He gave a slight nod, a farewell, not to her, but to the illusion he once had of being a man who always got it right. Then he left. The door closed softly, as if no one had ever entered, but Imani knew that brief visit had left a deeper aftershock than the wildest storms. And she, the woman left behind, no longer needed to be rescued. She just needed to be believed. The second floor of the Whitmore estate was as quiet as an unfinished painting. White walls, polished wooden floors, glowing under the gentle late autumn light. Everything remained just as before, orderly, elegant, not a speck of dust in sight, and yet no trace of warmth lingered. Daniel stood in the long hallway, connecting the rooms, holding a cup of strong black coffee he hadn't sipped. Its familiar aroma did nothing to calm his thoughts. The only thing circling his mind was a definite, very real sense of emptiness, the kind that settles in when someone who used to be part of a space is now just an absence. Leo's room was at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar. He gave it a gentle push. Leo sat in the middle of the bed, surrounded by toys no one had bothered to clean up. A half-finished Lego set lay scattered like an abandoned project on the floor. On the tiny desk stood a crayon drawing. A house, a blonde-haired adult, a little boy, and a dark-skinned woman in a green dress standing between the two, holding both hands. There was no need to ask who she was. Daniel stepped in, set the coffee on a shelf, and sat down on the edge of the bed. "You wanted to draw, Miss Imani?" Leo nodded, then looked down. His eyes held a depth far beyond his years, like he was forcing himself to grow up faster out of guilt. "I wish she were still here." That sentence pierced Daniel's chest like a blade. Not because the boy missed her, but because in a world full of material abundance, the one thing Leo needed most was something his father had shattered with his hands. "So do I," Daniel replied softly, eyes fixed on the drawing. Leo didn't ask why Miss Imani hadn't come back, didn't ask why Daniel had sent her away. There are some questions children instinctively know adults can't answer with complete honesty. Later that evening, after dinner, Daniel entered Imani's room for the first time since she'd left. It was on the first floor at the far end of the staff wing, but she had transformed it into something that felt genuinely lived in. It didn't smell like disinfectant like the other rooms. Instead, it smelled of cinnamon lavender and peace. An open book on the wooden desk, The Value of Patience in Raising Children. The bookmarked page read, "Create a sense of safety through consistency and listening." Daniel flipped through the pages, unsure what he was searching for. Maybe some sign she still wanted to stay, or at the very least, that she had once belonged here. In the corner of the room was a small wooden box decorated with colorful stickers. He opened it, drawings Leo had made by hand. Each one captured a moment, her slicing fruit for him, her reading stories holding him while he cried. The pictures weren't perfect, not symmetrical, but the eyes in them always shone, the eyes of a child who felt safe. Once again, Daniel sat down. This time in the chair Imani used to sit in every night to read. He raised a hand to his forehead, pressing it against his temple. The exhaustion wasn't from work. It came from an invisible pressure, gnawing at every hollow space inside him. He had never felt lost in his own home. Until now. Rebecca used to say he forgot too easily everything unrelated to operations, including emotions. When she was alive, she had filled this house with warmth, through a gentleness Daniel never valued enough. And now, maybe only Imani had made this house feel alive again after her. All the other staff were competent, but only Imani cared. She knew Leo was allergic to grapes, so she always picked apples and strawberries. She knew he feared the dark, so she placed glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. She never treated him like the little master, but as a child who needed love. And most of all, she never tried to be loved. She loved. Daniel exhaled deeply, stood up and left the room. On the way back to the main bedroom, he passed the small library, the space where Rebecca used to spend her evenings reading. Beneath the desk lamp lay an old letter in a photo frame. He'd read it hundreds of times. But tonight, the last lines weighed heavier than ever. If you find someone who makes our child smile more, please let them stay. Don't let the fear of the past blind you to the kindness right before you. Daniel placed his hand on the glass. Cold, smooth, untouchable. Just like the things he'd let slip through his fingers, as light as breath, yet heavy as a lifetime. He turned away, walking toward his room, a grand, luxurious space designed by a famous architect. But when the door shut behind him, what enveloped Daniel was a silence of a different kind. No familiar footsteps echoing through the hall in the morning. No soft giggles downstairs as Imani sneaked Leo an extra cookie after dinner. Only a man, a night, and an empty room, not because it lacked people, but it lacked the very things he never knew he needed. The little park on the west side of Brooklyn wasn't anything special. Just a line of old maple trees, a few chipped wooden benches, and a simple playground with one slide. A set of swings and two faded spring riders, worn down by sun and wind. But on that autumn afternoon, in weather just cool enough to need a light scarf, that unremarkable space became the backdrop for a reunion no one saw coming. Imani sat quietly on the last bench in the park. She didn't usually come here, but something today had pushed her out of her apartment, book in hand, walking with no destination in mind. She needed air that didn't smell like disinfectant. She needed to breathe outside the tight confines of four narrow walls. She opened her book, but didn't read. Her eyes lingered on the children playing nearby. Between bursts of laughter and the soft wheels of a stroller being pushed by a young mother, she heard a voice that struck her heart like a forgotten melody. Miss Imani. The voice wasn't loud, but rang clear like background music. You've always known by heart. She looked up. Leo. The boy ran to her, flinging himself into her arms without waiting for a response. She froze for a second, then instinct kicked in. Her arms closed around his small, trembling back. I missed you so much, Imani whispered, unable to hide the tremble in her voice. Leo looked up, his wide eyes brimming with tears. I'm sorry I lied. I didn't want you to leave. Imani gently brushed his hair. It's okay. You don't need to apologize. I understand. A quiet heartbeat passed between them. Then she saw Daniel standing just a few steps away, not interrupting, not speaking. The golden light of late afternoon softened his features, but his eyes were as clear as the first day they met again. Imani slowly stood as Leo pulled away and played with the other kids. The two adults stood facing each other in the middle of a noisy playground that suddenly felt like the only quiet place in the world. She liked this park, Daniel said, his voice low and calm. Rebecca, when she was alive, she used to bring Leo here every weekend. Imani nodded, her eyes briefly touching the necklace Rebecca once wore, now resting neatly at Daniel's shirt collar. She didn't ask why he still kept it. She understood. Some memories don't have to be denied to begin again. I didn't think I'd see you again so soon, Imani said, her voice steady, though her gaze held a gentle kind of caution. I didn't think I deserved to. Daniel replied, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. It wasn't a pleading smile, but one of quiet awareness that sometimes just standing here was already a privilege. I came because of Leo, not because of you, Imani said, eyes still watching the boy's laughter as he slid down the slide. Daniel nodded. I know. Imani turned toward him fully for the first time, framed by the warm golden light of the setting sun. Have you ever wondered why I didn't get angry? I have, Daniel said. Many nights. And I realized, you didn't need to be angry to show me I was wrong. Your silence said more than any accusation ever could. She smiled, gently, almost too faint to notice. I used to try to learn how to be angry, she said. But I realized women like me, if we're angry, we're called rude. If we're quiet, we're called cold. So I chose to live kindly, but firmly. Daniel looked down at the ground. There's no excuse I can offer that's good enough. But I want you to know, since that day, not one night has passed where I've slept through. Not because I feared your judgment, but because I judged myself for not standing with the one person who truly understood Leo. The distance between them was now barely half a step, but the weight of unspoken words still hung in the air like threads. Imani said softly, we can't go back to what we were, Daniel. Trust isn't a switch you flip when you realize you're wrong. It's a shattered mirror. Even if you piece it back together, it'll never reflect the same way. Daniel didn't reply right away. He sighed a long, deep breath, like he was folding away the last remnants of his pride. I'm not asking you to come back. Not now, at least. I want Leo to know. You didn't leave him. And I want you to know, I'm learning how to be a father, a real one. Imani nodded slowly for the first time, her gaze softening, her eyes lowering just slightly. Where will you start? By taking Leo to the park, by listening more than I speak, and by not assuming I'm right, just because I'm used to being obeyed. A soft breeze blew through. Imani's hair fluttered gently. She pulled her coat closer, her gaze drifting toward Leo, who had turned and was calling out, Miss Imani, look how high I climbed. Imani smiled, a real full smile, the first in weeks. I see you. You're doing great. Daniel stood beside her, not interrupting, not trying to hold on to anything. He stood like a man learning to let the people he loves be free, unbound by the kind of control that comes dressed as good intentions. And in that moment, no more words were needed to understand. Forgiveness doesn't arrive through perfect apologies. It comes when we choose to show up, even when no one expects us to anymore. The photo was taken on a cell phone, a slightly blurred angle, late afternoon light casting soft shadows that made the scene look like a painting left unfinished. But though it wasn't sharp, its message was clear, like headlights cutting through a night. A black woman kneeling to tie the shoelace of a blonde-haired boy. Beside them, a white man in a rolled-up dress shirt, his eyes gentle. The caption posted by an anonymous account read, The maid returns to claim the heart of the Whitmore household. Over 3,000 shares in less than 24 hours. Messages flooded Daniel's phone like a dam had burst from legal counsel board members. And Margaret Holloway. That name for Daniel was a cold, persistent memory. Rebecca's college best friend. I am the vice president of the Whitmore Foundation, the charity where Imani once volunteered before being hired as a nanny at the estate. Margaret didn't mince words. Daniel, I need you to act appropriately. You know the media is targeting you, and being seen publicly with someone previously accused of child abuse is unacceptable. Her voice was cold, forged steel. Daniel sat slowly on the office sofa, eyes drifting to the city beyond the glass. She was never charged with anything. It was a misunderstanding, and it's been cleared up. But the press doesn't care about justice, Daniel. They care about headlines. Right now, your name is leading theirs. In your position, every move is scrutinized. You can't let personal emotions damage the company or Rebecca's legacy, or Leo. That final blow landed like a knife clean and deep. Rebecca. Daniel had always thought he should live in a way that honored her memory. But now that memory was being wielded like a whip, punishing every personal choice he made. Margaret, he said quietly, don't use Rebecca's name to force me into a life she never demanded. She was the first to tell me that real love isn't about being right or wrong. It's about knowing who you need and having the courage to hold on to them. The line went silent for a beat. Then Margaret's voice returned crisp and sharp. Then prepare yourself. If you continue, I will recommend suspending all foundation operations. And you know full well what that means. Thousands of children rely on that support. Daniel gripped the phone tightly. His anger didn't explode. It sank deep into his breath, heavy and restrained. A choice. Once again, he stood at a familiar crossroads. Personal emotion versus social responsibility. But this time, the price wasn't just reputation. It was the trust of a woman he had never truly protected. That evening, Daniel went to see Imani. She was at the community library, teaching neighborhood children reading classes. The space was simple old wooden shelves, floor mats, and animal-shaped cushions. Amid the children, she sat cross-legged reading Charlotte's Web in a soft and steady voice. Daniel stood at the door, not stepping in, and just watching. When she saw him, her eyes no longer looked away, but they didn't open either, just the gaze of someone who already knew what was coming. After the reading session ended, they stepped outside. The early winter wind was gentle. Red maple leaves drifted across the stone path. I knew this would happen, Imani said first, not waiting for him to explain. Daniel nodded. I can't control the media, but I won't let anyone control you. She turned to face him, eyes locked on his. No one controls me, Daniel. What exhausts me isn't the public. You think I need to be protected, instead of simply standing beside as an equal. Daniel fell silent. Her words struck like a quiet reckoning. He had grown too comfortable being the protector. But with Imani, protection could feel like a cage. I don't need to be protected, she said. I need to be trusted. Another gust of cold wind swept past. She adjusted her scarf, strolling toward the narrow road that led to the bus stop. Daniel followed for a beat, then stopped. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was sure, if he let power and prejudice wedge themselves between them again, what he stood to lose wasn't just Imani. It was the last piece of his humanity. At that very moment, inside a closed-door meeting on the 52nd floor of Whitmore Holdings, Margaret Holloway placed a photo on the boardroom table, Imani hugging a white child. Are we prepared to accept this woman as the face of the Whitmore family's charitable foundation? No one responded, but the storm had officially begun. The day Rebecca died, Daniel didn't cry. He didn't allow himself to. Not because he was strong, but because to Daniel, tears had always meant losing control. And he couldn't afford to lose control, not while holding the hand of his 6-month-old son through the sterile corridors of a hospital, not while shaking hands at a funeral with a face carved in stone, and especially, not while he knew all eyes were watching. But 3 years after Rebecca's death, on a night no one else would ever know, Daniel collapsed on the bedroom floor, where her pillow still held the faint scent of her perfume, and cried like a child who had just lost the world. That was the first and only time he had let grief fully touch him. Or so he thought. Until today. The small wooden box had been tucked away in the bottom drawer of Rebecca's desk, locked since the day she passed. Daniel had never opened it, partly out of respect and fear. But after Margaret invoked her name in a high-pressure meeting, her voice sharp like a blade, something long buried inside him stirred. That night, after Leo was asleep, Daniel unlocked the box. Inside were small keepsakes, concert tickets, an unfinished embroidered handkerchief, a fabric baby bracelet she meant to give Leo on his first birthday, and one envelope. The paper had yellowed slightly. The handwriting leaned softly, elegantly. "If I'm no longer with you." Daniel sat down, hands trembling slightly as he opened the letter. "Daniel, when you read this, I may no longer be in your world. I'm not writing to bind you or make you feel guilty. I'm writing because I believe love doesn't end when someone leaves. It simply changes form. I want you to have someone new by your side. Not to replace me, but to walk with you in a different way. You once said, 'No one could ever love you like I do.' But I believe the opposite. Love should never be the only reason someone has to exist in your life. It should be the reason they feel free to stay. So if one day someone enters your life, even if she's different, even if she comes from a place the world refuses to accept, please let your heart speak, not the voices of others. You are a good man. But even good men can hurt others through silence or fear. If that person makes Leo laugh, sings, and tells him bedtime stories, she deserves your hand, no matter what the world says. Don't love me out of duty. Live the present by choice. And if you can, let that woman know. I thank her for being there for the two men I loved most." Rebecca. The light in Daniel's study flickered momentarily like a blink from fate itself. He set the letter down his chest, folding inward, as if someone had hugged him tightly from behind. Not out of regret, but release. For years he had kept Rebecca in his heart, like a glass statue, untouchable, irreplaceable. But in her final words, she had shown him how to break the chains he had locked around himself. He rose, stepped into the hallway, and looked into Leo's room. The boy was fast asleep, holding a plush tiger, the first gift Imani had given him, still wrapped in its little purple bow. Daniel quietly closed the door, returned to his room, opened his laptop, and typed a short email. No begging, no drama. Just an invitation. Between two adults. The next day, Imani arrived at the location, a small art exhibit, hosted by a young black artist. The space was simple, but each painting burned with vivid emotion, contrasting with the room's quiet. Daniel stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on an abstract painting. A woman standing in the rain, holding an umbrella too small to cover herself, and the child she shielded. She was soaked, but still protecting him. Does she remind you of anyone? Imani stepped beside him, her eyes halting at the overlapping brushstrokes. She's not hiding from the rain, she said, but she's not complaining either. Daniel turned to her, meeting her gaze fully. Because she knows. Some storms aren't meant to be avoided. They're meant to be walked through so we can grow. A soft pause settled between them. No one needed to say more. No apologies, no promises. Only presence and a small folded piece of paper Daniel handed her. Imani opened it. A copy of Rebecca's letter. She read it slowly, very slowly. And when she reached the final line, her hand loosened slightly. Not out of shock, but because in that moment, she understood. Some truths take time to be ready for, but some only need one letter to be forgiven. Daniel didn't reach for her hand, but their eyes met. This time there was no third person in their story. No Rebecca, no Margaret. No society is filled with noise and judgment. Only two people. And one simple truth. Love isn't about replacing. It's about continuing. Storms don't always arrive with thunder and downpour. Some come through text messages, through a single article, through the heavy silence behind judging eyes. On Monday morning, Imani woke up later than usual. Over the weekend, for the first time in months, she had allowed herself a full smile when Leo hugged her in the park and whispered, "I wish you were my mom." It wasn't just a child's innocent wish, it was a declaration. No blood, no law, just love. She exited the bedroom greeted by the soft morning light pouring through the window. But peace lasted less than an hour. Her phone buzzed. The first message came from Julia, a former colleague at the foundation. "Imani, you should check the front page of the Whitmore Post. They're digging up old stuff." She opened her browser and everything shattered. Headline: Woman seen with Daniel Whitmore was once investigated for child abuse. Old records resurface. Beneath the headline were grainy images and documents from an incident over a decade ago. While volunteering at a children's center in Chicago, Imani had once been involved in a case where a child was mildly injured during play. She was supervising that day. The case had been closed with no charges, but now the file buried long ago had been exhumed, twisted, inflated, and turned into a weapon. The article didn't accuse her outright, but the language was calculated, previously investigated, possibly involved. Though no evidence was confirmed, each line was a carefully laid trap. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls from journalists, requests for interviews, questions slicing through the air like bullets. Have you ever hit a child? Are you using sympathy to climb into high society? Did Daniel Whitmore know about your past? Imani powered off the phone, but silence couldn't stop the noise. In this world, people don't need truth to judge, just a plausible doubt to justify their cruelty. Daniel was in a board meeting when the first message came through. His assistant quietly placed the newspaper on the table, her expression tight with concern. He scanned the headline and his chest constricted. Not because he doubted her, but because he knew exactly what was coming. Margaret Holloway entered the meeting shortly after, visibly pleased. "I warned you, Daniel. That woman is a liability. And now she's not just a PR disaster, she's a stain on the foundation. The board requests that you remove all executive duties until this crisis passes." Daniel looked around the room. Every face that once counted as an ally now refused to meet his eyes. Not one person spoke up. Not one dared to stand for what was right. In that moment, Daniel understood he could be CEO of a billion-dollar empire, but in fear even power curls up like a frightened child. That night, Daniel went to see Imani. She wasn't home. The door was slightly ajar. On the table were newspapers, printed articles, and a folded handwritten letter. To Daniel, "I'm not running. I need time. Not to hide, but to stand steady. What happened in Chicago was real, but it wasn't me. That child fell while climbing a bookshelf. I was the only adult nearby, so I was named. And as usual, black women are the easiest targets for accusations without evidence. I didn't tell you because I was hiding. I didn't tell you because I was tired. Tired of starting every relationship with a disclaimer. I wanted someone to see me, not my record, not what people said, just me. If you still believe in me, I will return, not to beg, but to stand beside you with my head held high in this storm." Imani. Daniel folded the letter and held it to his chest. Nothing in it frightened him, only made him furious, not at Imani, but at the world he had helped uphold, a world where truth isn't strong enough if it comes from the mouth of a black woman with no power. He grabbed his phone, called his lawyer. "They want me to stay quiet." "Fine, but starting tomorrow, I'm telling the whole truth, not to defend her, but to let the world know I don't need their approval to know who I love." That night, Daniel wrote a personal post on social media. He shared the truth about the Chicago incident, the context, the facts. He spoke about Imani, the woman who taught his son to love without condition. He didn't apologize on her behalf. He declared one thing: love doesn't need permission. It only needs to be lived. The post spread like wildfire. Thousands of comments, hundreds of shares. Some praised, some condemned, some lashed out. But for the first time, a powerful white man used his voice not to rescue a black woman, but to believe in her. Not out of obligation, but out of trust. Imani sat quietly in a small suburban cafe, watching her phone screen. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. Her heart was returning to itself beat by beat, as if finally it could breathe freely again. She looked out the window. A breeze drifted by, and with it, a quiet, growing hope. Because some love stories only begin when the storm breaks. The Whitmore Club stood firmly on Fifth Avenue, nestled between weathered limestone buildings and maple trees, slowly changing colors with the season. It had long been the pride of the Whitmore lineage, not for its opulence, but for what remained unseen rooms, without cameras, paintings, without signatures, meetings without minutes. A place where power wasn't proven by titles, but presumed by names and heritage. Daniel walked through the mahogany doors, hair neatly combed suit, without a crease, polished shoes, spotless. He looked no different from the generations of Whitmore men who had walked this same path. But the shadow behind him was something none of them had ever dared to bring. Imani. She wore a simple champagne-colored dress, her hair in a neat bun, delicate earrings glinting softly. Nothing flashy, but she walked as if no one had the right to question her presence. That walk made the older women sitting in the grand hall pause their conversations. Their eyes swept across her like she was a smudge on an otherwise pristine silk napkin. Daniel paused outside the main chamber. "You don't have to go in if you don't want to." Imani looked at him. Her smile didn't waver. "I came because I have the right to be here, not to ask permission." The doors opened. All eyes turned to them. Inside were men in gray suits, women in vintage gowns, every gesture polished by decades of galas and legacy. At the center sat Henry Whitmore, Daniel's father, a man who had gone his entire life without uttering the words, "I was wrong." He didn't look at Imani as she entered, didn't offer a seat, didn't greet her. Only a slight glance as if to confirm that the worst he'd feared had come to pass. Daniel spoke first. "If today's meeting is about inheritance, I'm ready. But if this is about the woman beside me, then we have nothing to discuss." A middle-aged woman, Daniel's Aunt Evelyn, cleared her throat delicately. "This isn't about her. This is about the image of the family. You know very well, Daniel, our name has been built over a century, from the portraits in museums to donations to Harvard. Do you think this won't tarnish that?" Daniel gave a faint smile. "Since when did compassion and decency ruin a reputation?" Henry tapped his cane against the floor, voice ringing out like a church bell. "This isn't about compassion. It's about structure, about ensuring the Whitmore name doesn't drown in this era of so-called false equality." Imani stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She spoke calm, clear, and steady enough to silence the room. A structure built on fear isn't called tradition. It's a ghost clinging to the future it refuses to let be born. Henry paused. Perhaps deep down, he had never expected the girl to speak, let alone with such precision. "I don't want to join the Whitmores. I don't need land or titles. I don't need my name in anyone's will. But I will not step aside so others can stay comfortable with their prejudice. I love your son not because he's a Whitmore, but because he was the first to stand beside me when the world begged him to step away." She turned to Daniel. "I'm ready to walk away if loving me means losing them." Daniel didn't hesitate. "No. You are the only thing I'd choose, not because of tradition, but because of freedom. The meeting ended in silence. No applause, no official decree. Just stares cold as the granite walls of the Whitmore house. But outside, the sun still bathed the stone steps in light. And for the first time, Daniel stepped through those doors, not as a successor, but as a man who had refused to inherit anything that no longer aligned with his conscience. Imani didn't ask him anything. In his sense, she knew 100 choices had already been weighed. So she reached for his hand, not to comfort, but to carry the weight of a love not easily welcomed. That evening they returned to Imani's small apartment. Their first photo together wasn't taken at a gala, not for the press, but in the kitchen doing dishes. Leo took it with his phone and captioned it, "Our family." They laughed, not loudly, but truly. Somewhere out there, the elite still whispered about Daniel Whitmore's controversial relationship. But here, in a tiny kitchen under warm lights and children's laughter, no one needed the world's approval. Because sometimes, what needs breaking isn't the rules, but the invisible walls inside the human heart. The Whitmore estate in Southampton always smelled of old wood and time. Thick velvet drapes, polished oak floors, and the steady chime of a grandfather clock pulsed like ancestors' breath, still exerting control, even in their absence. Daniel hadn't set foot in this place for nearly a year. Since his mother's funeral, Henry had lived here alone, away from Manhattan, from a world moving too fast for him to understand. And ever since, between father and son, there was a distance as long as the mansion's corridor, beautiful, cold, and silent. Today, Daniel returned. No invitation, no message ahead. Only a pull inside that had urged him out of his Manhattan apartment and into a 3-hour winter morning drive. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe closure. Consider a conversation. Maybe a new beginning. The old butler Walter opened the wooden door. His weathered, expressionless face was exactly as Daniel remembered it from childhood, never revealing emotion, always present when needed. He nodded, asked nothing, and stepped aside. "The master is in the study." Daniel gave a slight nod and strolled down the marble hallway. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, stern eyes, vintage suits, proud chins. A legacy built not just with ambition, but with expectation and pressure. Henry sat by the window, teacup in hand, silver hair glowing in the pale light. He didn't turn at the sound of footsteps, but his voice as ever was steady. "So you finally came. After defying the entire family, you needed a small victory by visiting your old father." Daniel didn't sit. He leaned against the closed wooden door, his voice calm. "I didn't come to win. I came to ask, is there anything left between us, besides disappointment?" Henry set down his teacup. The porcelain clink rang out sharp and hollow. "You're the first in 3 generations of Whitmores to ask that question." Silence stretched for a few seconds. Then Daniel moved forward and took the seat across from his father. The room smelled of old books and waxed wood, but above all of things never spoken. Like a serene field, but hid rusted metal beneath the soil. "I'm not asking for your approval," Daniel said. "I want you to understand Imani isn't some rebellious choice. She's the one who taught me how to be a father, who taught Leo that love doesn't require permission. And more than that, she didn't come to replace Mom. She helped me stop blaming myself for not protecting her when she passed." Henry was quiet. The hand that once gripped power at international boardrooms now trembled slightly. He didn't meet his son's eyes, but his voice lowered rougher now, like stepping over a line he had avoided his whole life. "Your mother suffered under the rules of this house, but she never fought back. She endured to keep this name free of scandal. Do you think I'm proud of that? Daniel froze. For the first time, he heard his father's voice, not like stone, but like an old guilt cracking at its seams. Rebecca once told me, "You loved Mom," Daniel said, "but you loved the family name more." Henry looked out the window where bare branches swayed in the wind. Maybe she was right, but that's how I was taught to love, through protection, sacrifice, control. If you're asking me if I regret it, I do. But regret doesn't mean I know how to make it right. Daniel sighed, leaning back in his chair. I didn't know how to love either. I used money control and silence. Until one day I saw Leo flinch when I raised my voice. I saw Imani walk away without a single accusation. And I realized, love without listening is just another form of possession. The room felt like a cathedral after a funeral. The afternoon lights slanted across the Persian rug beneath them. Then Henry turned and looked at his son. For the first time in years, his eyes weren't those of a father, but of an older man, tired, humbled, and finally trying to understand a son he had never truly known. You love her. Enough to give it all up. Daniel nodded without hesitation. Not to give up, to begin. A life where I don't have to ask permission to be myself. Henry stared into his cooling tea, then spoke softly, almost like a confession. If you can do that, without turning bitter like me, then you've already surpassed me. There was no hug, no handshake. Just two men, one aging, one growing, sitting together in a room, heavy with history, finally allowing truth to breathe. Daniel left the estate as twilight settled over the horizon. The car rolled down a leaf-covered path. In the rearview mirror, the mansion receded into the distance, no longer a symbol of pressure, but a memory finally laid to rest. And he knew some cracks in the bloodline would never heal. But sometimes, those cracks are the first places light gets in. Leo's bedroom light was always on at 7 p.m. It was a routine that began when he was too young to understand fear of the dark, but old enough to feel the coldness of the space beside him in bed. Rebecca used to sit at the edge of his bed each night, her voice soft and low as she read. After she passed, Daniel took over, but he never had a mother's gentleness. Each reading ended in haste, or sometimes never happened, swallowed by work. So Leo learned to soothe himself with light, a hug, pillow, and imagination. Until Imani came. Not immediately. Not with games or sweet talk, but with small, deliberate gestures. She added a dinosaur rug so he could read on the floor without getting cold. She hung a star projector and adjusted the angle each night so a single star would fall gently across his forehead as he drifted off. She didn't read from books, she told stories from memory. Sometimes the names were wrong. Sometimes the plots unraveled, but they made him laugh harder than anything else. Leo once thought she was magic, but magic, like everyone else in his life, eventually disappeared. When Imani left because of the media scandal, no one gave him clear answers. Daniel said, "She needs time, but children don't need explanations. They feel." And Leo felt something was missing, like he had fallen off an invisible cushion. He didn't ask, didn't cry. He just returned to his old habits, the light, the pillow, the silence. But when Daniel publicly defended Imani on social media, the world reacted, and even Leo, though still young, heard the whispers at school. Some kids called her the famous maid. Others repeated the ugly words their parents had muttered over dinner. Leo didn't know what was right or wrong. He just knew he missed the smell of lavender on her sweaters. Missed the banana bread she'd sneak him with extra honey, even though she'd promised to go easy on the sugar. Missed the way she truly listened, even when he talked nonsense. One night, Leo opened the drawer under his bed and pulled out a crayon drawing. 3 figures. A blonde-haired adult, his dad. A brown-skinned woman with curly hair tied up Miss Imani, and a tiny boy in the middle holding both their hands. The paper was wrinkled, and the colors faded, but Leo cradled it like treasure. He got out of bed and walked down the hallway in silence. The house was dark, except for the glow of the study. He opened the door. Daniel looked up surprised. "You're not asleep?" Leo didn't answer. He stepped forward and placed the drawing on the desk. "Dad, if someone did something in the past but it wasn't wrong, do they still deserve forgiveness?" Daniel looked at his son. In Leo's brown eyes was a quiet storm, not loud, but impossible to ignore. "You're asking about Imani?" Leo nodded, then looked down. Daniel gently pulled him onto his lap. "You know, sometimes grown-ups don't protect each other as they should. Sometimes they're scared. Sometimes they think staying silent is best. But that wasn't your fault, and it wasn't hers." Leo bit his lip. "I don't care what people say. I want her to come home." Daniel nodded slowly, his lips tight. He knew now it wasn't just Imani he'd hurt. He'd let his son lose faith in what was supposed to be certain. "So do I, Leo. I'm doing everything I can to ensure she knows. We don't just want her here. We need her." Leo rested his head against his father's chest, as if to confirm that maybe the world could still be trusted a little if grown-ups were brave enough to admit when they were wrong. A week later, Daniel took Leo to the community library, where Imani had quietly returned after the media storm faded. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. No tears, no public embrace. Just Leo's whisper, "I brought this for you." He held out a small box. Inside was a worn fabric bracelet that Imani used to wear while working at the children's center. "You forgot it last time." Imani froze. She hadn't known Leo had kept it. And she didn't know that he, not Daniel. He was the first one to open the door for her to return. That night in Leo's room, the light was off. It didn't need to be on anymore. Imani sat at the edge of the bed, reading Where the Wild Things Are. Her voice was steady, her rhythm natural. Daniel stood at the doorway, not stepping in, just watching. Leo was fast asleep. One arm wrapped around his stuffed tiger, the other clutching the hem of Imani's sleeve, as if afraid that letting go would make her disappear again. Imani turned slightly and met Daniel's gaze. She said nothing, but the soft smile at the corner of her lips. It was the final door they needed to open. Not the door of a house, but the door to a child's heart, where love is understood in its purest, simplest form. The glass building of the Legacy Initiative stood in the heart of West Village, New York, modern, open-minded, and intensely ambitious. This was no place for silence. Every hallway buzzed with constant dialogue about social justice, women in leadership, diversity, and the things that had never truly been welcomed in the upper echelons of society. And it was here that an unexpected piece of news spread throughout the organization. On Monday morning, Imani Rousseau, former community program manager once embroiled in a media scandal, had been nominated by the executive board to become the organization's official spokesperson. The news spread like a matchstick in a barn full of hay. On the top floors, there was applause. But in the mid-level meeting rooms, glances were exchanged, brows subtly furrowed, because her name wasn't just tied to the social programs that had saved hundreds of children. It was also tied to Daniel Whitmore, the white billionaire symbol of power, the man who had publicly defended her during the scandal that once sent the press into a frenzy. Imani had become a symbol. But symbols aren't always welcomed. She received a lunch invitation from Vivian Leclerc, the current CEO, and the most powerful woman in the organization. The meeting place was a classic French restaurant, lit with warm amber light and the soft fall of piano notes over clinking wine glasses. Imani arrived on time, dressed in a light brown suit, with her hair neatly pinned up. No red lipstick, no expensive jewelry, only the calm gaze of someone no longer surprised by compliments laced with hidden claws. Vivian raised her glass lips curved in a half-smile. "I must admit, you've made it impossible for them to ignore you. After your projects in the Bronx and Harlem and that spectacular comeback in the media legacy, couldn't find a better representative. On paper." Imani didn't respond. She knew that when someone said "on paper," they weren't ready to acknowledge you fully. But there will be a lot of pressure if you accept. The interviews, the old articles, your relationship with Daniel Whitmore, they'll use everything to turn you into a target. Imani set down her water glass and lifted her gaze. "If I become spokesperson, I won't be representing myself. I'll be representing the children growing up with voices that go unheard, the women who sacrifice everything just to be heard, and those once deemed too unsafe to be put in front of a camera." Vivian paused, her eyes sharpening. "I used to be like you, but I learned something. If you want to change the world, you must convince it you're not a threat. Or start by showing the world that not all threats are bad." Imani's reply made Vivian let out a small laugh, not mocking, but surprised. For the first time in years, she saw a woman who didn't need to pretend to submit, nor try hard to rebel. She stood firm. That night, Daniel brought Leo to Imani's place. They didn't talk much. It was an ordinary evening, cooking dinner together, listening to soft jazz, and reading a few pages of a book. But Daniel's eyes remained thoughtful. After Leo went to bed, he stood by the window, gazing at the shimmering city. "They'll dissect you. Every word, every move. Are you sure you want to step into that?" Imani stood beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm not stepping in to be liked. I'm stepping in because I don't want others to have to step out carrying the same scars I once did." Daniel embraced her gently. "I'm not afraid of your strength. I'm just afraid you'll be lonely in it." She turned to him, her voice steady and clear. "I've already been lonely, Daniel, my whole life. But this time, if I'm lonely, I won't be the only one who knows I'm right. And that's enough." A few days later, Legacy's first press conference was held downtown. Dozens of camera lenses, crowded media rows, and bright lights aimed straight at the podium. Imani didn't appear as a saved victim or a tough warrior woman. She stood tall, eyes forward, each step unwavering. "They'll count every second you pause. They'll record every expression. They'll analyze every word," Vivian whispered behind her. Imani softly replied, "Then let them see a woman who knows exactly what she's saying." The cameras rolled, the lights brightened, and then Imani spoke. "I am not the product of pity. I am living proof that opportunity can be created, not inherited. I'm not here to erase anyone. I'm here to remind everyone that a seat at the table doesn't belong only to those who are always invited, but also to those brave enough to walk in unannounced." There was a smattering of applause. Then it spread. Not loud, but enough to silence the critics. Daniel stood at the back of the room. He didn't need to push his way to the front. Didn't need to hold up a sign of support. Because in that very moment, Imani was no longer Daniel Whitmore's girl. She was herself. A voice, a face, a wave. And for Leo, watching the live stream on a small classroom screen, his teacher standing beside him, the boy grinned and told his desk mate, "That's Ms. Imani. She's the best person in the world." That simple sentence, perhaps the strongest testament of all. Not a title, not a reputation. However, a child believes in kindness because someone truly lived it in the eye of the storm. Late afternoon in New York carried the crisp chill of the season's end as oak leaves turned to copper and the golden sunset brushed softly across glass buildings, reflecting the hurried silhouettes of passers-by. Inside Daniel's penthouse, light filtered through sheer curtains, casting a pale golden hue over the living room, like memories gently layered over time. Imani was folding Leo's clothes. A small task, yet she did it with gentle focus, as if each fold was part of the new life she was quietly building piece by piece. Daniel's phone buzzed on the dining table. A message from Vivian checked the breaking news section on MetroStream. "Call me immediately." Imani happened to see the notification appear. She didn't mean to read it, but Whitmore, Rousseau, scandal echoed in her mind like a struck bell. Daniel stepped out of his office. It took only seconds to open the article, and then the room seemed to tighten with a heavy silence. A photo was on MetroStream's front page. At a party 6 years ago, Daniel was leaning in to whisper something into a woman's ear. Long brown hair, captivating gray eyes. Amelia Voss, his once infamous ex-lover, had dominated finance gossip one summer. And what made the photo explode wasn't the intimacy. It was the new caption added beneath. Insider source reveals Amelia Voss may be carrying Whitmore's secret. Could this be the real reason behind Whitmore's support of Imani Rousseau? A smokescreen of emotion to hide past responsibility. No one spoke. But the space between Daniel and Imani felt wider than ever. That night, Imani said nothing. She wasn't angry. She didn't raise her voice. She just pulled back a little. Daniel sat across from her at the dinner table, rubbing his hands together, a habit that surfaced only when he felt out of control. "Imani, that photo is ancient. Amelia and I ended things a long time ago, way before you and I ever met." She nodded, but her eyes didn't fully believe. Not because she thought he was lying, but because she knew the world outside didn't care about the truth. They only cared about stories that were easy to digest. And now, they were rewriting this one in the boldest ink possible. "I know," Imani said softly. "But what I don't know is Amelia's carrying your child." Daniel froze. Not because he was guilty, but because he knew even a moment's hesitation could be a knife. "No. She once lied about it to keep me around. But it was just another game between us. I never went back. Not once." Imani didn't ask more, but she stood and walked to the window. The city still shone brightly, but inside her was a soft, deep darkness. Not from pain, but from understanding that once trust is shaken, it needs more than reassurance to recover. The next morning, the news spread fast. Headlines screamed, "Love triangle shock Whitmore between two women." Imani Rousseau, rising symbol, or pawn of the elite legacy initiative, immediately received demands for a clarifying press conference. And for the first time, Imani didn't walk into the meeting room as a leader, but as someone laid bare for examination. Vivian called her into a private office. Her voice had lost its pride, carrying only concern. "I've prepared to protect you from public backlash. But what worries me isn't the media. It's whether you still believe in yourself enough to go on." Imani pressed her lips together. "I'm not afraid of accusations. I'm just afraid of losing myself trying to prove I deserve this." Vivian sighed and gently touched her hand. "Then don't prove anything. Just stand for what you believe in. The rest, let time sort it out." That evening, Daniel stood outside Imani's door. No warning, no apology, no bouquet. Just a small old wooden box in his hands. When Imani opened the door, he held it out. "It belonged to my mother. She used to keep a journal. And here is a page she wrote the day I met you at the library." Imani opened it. Soft handwriting appeared. "Daniel seems different. There's something in his eyes, like he's seeing someone for the first time, without fear of being hurt. I haven't met this person. But if she's the one who made my son realize silence can also be warm, Then she must be someone worth keeping. Imani paused. It was a mother's sentiment for someone she'd never met, but enough to affirm some things are bigger than scandal, bigger than gossip. The recognition between souls who have known loss and found each other by their healed scars. She didn't hug Daniel, didn't cry. She nodded, softly, but enough to reopen the road back toward one another. A few days later, Amelia appeared on television. She smiled, her gray eyes cool. Daniel is my past, but I'm not carrying any child. I carry a lesson when you lose someone because they chose honesty over power. It's probably time to turn the page. The headlines faded like the tide pulling back. What remained was how Imani and Daniel didn't defend themselves. They chose silence as their affirmation that genuine trust doesn't need explanation. It demands action, continuity, staying when everything else tells you to leave. And so their love, neither loud, flawless, nor entirely free of shadows, became even more real, because it had weathered the storm, and still stood quietly and steadily like the shared rhythm of two hearts that had learned to understand, not judge. Late autumn in New York was like a wordless melody. Golden leaves swirling in the wind, the soft roll of car tires along the curb, and the setting sun melting gently onto the stone pavement. No noise, no drama, just enough calm to make people slow down and feel. In a small park near Imani's apartment, Leo sat on a wooden bench, his legs swinging above the ground, holding a book about planets in his arms. Beside him, Imani sat quietly, her eyes never leaving the boy. It was an afternoon like many others, but it would become a turning point no one had seen coming. Daniel has been away on a business trip to Tokyo for the past week. Before leaving, he'd asked Imani a question that seemed simple at the time. Are you ready for Leo to lean on just you for a few days? She smiled. But within that smile was a small hairline crack. Not because she doubted herself, but because she knew that attachment to a child like Leo. And the word mom wasn't something one could claim. It had to be given unconsciously, wholeheartedly. Leo sat still for quite a while, then suddenly turned to her. Miss Imani, why doesn't anyone at my school have curly hair like you? The question held no judgment, just the innocent curiosity of a child. Imani paused for a second, then laughed softly. Because my hair is natural. It's like a tree that grows its way, not by any rule book. Leo pondered that, then pointed at another child whose hair was tied up by her mother. His mom ties his hair well. Can you learn how? Imani nodded. If you want me to, I'll learn. Leo fell silent again for a while. Then he turned back to her voice, soft as a whisper. Mom. She didn't hear him. What did you say? Sweetheart? Leo repeated this time with quiet confidence. Mom, can you tie my hair like his? In that moment, the world seemed to pause. The wind stopped blowing. The leaves stopped falling. Every motion around them slowed to make space for those two syllables Imani had once been afraid to even hope for. Because she thought she wasn't worthy. Because she feared overstepping. Because she didn't dare believe that a child's heart could truly accept her. Her eyes welled up, not from bursting joy, but from the tears shed by someone who has endured much, and for the first time truly feels that love doesn't need to arrive on time or be named right away. It just needs to come naturally. She sat down, pulled a hair tie from her bag, and scooted closer. Okay then, let's see what I can do, sweetie. Leo smiled, innocent, beaming, as if he had no idea what special thing he had just done. But there was a trust deeper than words in how he sat still, bowed his head, and let her hands touch his hair. When Daniel returned, not much had changed in the apartment. But one small detail stopped him at the doorway, a new drawing on the wall. 3 people. Leo is in the center, holding Daniel's and Imani's hands. Below, in colorful, messy crayon letters, "I love Mom and Dad." Daniel reread it. And again. Each crooked letter. Each half-dried streak of color. Not because he needed confirmation of love, but he needed to start believing that what they'd built was no longer a fragile dream, but something tangible, a family. After Leo had fallen asleep that night, Imani told Daniel what had happened that afternoon in the park. Daniel didn't say much. He just wrapped his arms around her, buried his face in her hair, and whispered, "Thank you for waiting until he was ready. Not for me, but for Leo." Imani rested her head against his chest, eyes closed. "I've never been anyone's mother, but today when he called me that, I felt like I'd finally come home to a place I never knew I'd been looking for." Outside, the wind had picked up. A few last-season maple leaves drifted from the tree outside the window. The golden light in the apartment wasn't bright, just warm enough to wrap around the three of them. Three people who had once believed they were meant to walk life alone, now learning to hold each other's hands in a world that never stops moving. And in Imani's memory box, the word Mom, never recorded, never notarized, was etched deep like a pure red seal. Because sometimes life doesn't begin the moment you're born. It begins when a small heart chooses to belong in the most accurate way possible. On an early spring morning, the New York sky was as clear as glass, untouched by dust. New green buds peeked out from the branches, and rays of sunlight streamed through the window of the penthouse, casting streaks of light across the wooden floor, as if repainting life with new colors. In the living room, Daniel Whitmore, the man once dubbed the financial wall of Manhattan, was fumbling with the buttons on his son's dress shirt. Leo couldn't have cared less about collars or ties. He ran over and hugged Imani, who was placing the last fruit tart into a box. "Mom, don't forget to bring this one, okay? Miss, Sylvia loves fruit tarts." Imani leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Okay, I won't forget." Just a gentle reply, but it made Daniel lift his head and smile quietly. He had never asked Imani again about that title, because he understood once Leo had chosen, once love had chosen, the rest was simply time catching up with the truth. Today, they would make their first public appearance as a family, not on a stage or at a press conference, but at an education fundraiser for underprivileged children hosted by the Legacy Initiative. Imani was the guest of honor. Daniel was the main sponsor. And Leo, he had drawn the event poster complete with his warm, messy handwriting. "We all deserve a place to belong." Pale lavender blooms surrounded the conference center. Imani wore an ivory gown, her wrist adorned with the silver bracelet Daniel had given her the night they reconciled. It didn't sparkle or draw attention, but it shimmered gently with each of her movements, just like her. She stepped onto the podium. The spotlight no longer scared her. Cameras were no longer mirrors judging her. The audience sat silent. There were no skeptical eyes, only anticipation and respect. Imani began to speak. Not about her career, not about the scandal, but about a boy named Leo, who once hated having his hair brushed, feared the dark, and didn't believe anyone would stay long enough to be called Mom. And then she spoke of Daniel, a man who learned to let go of power, to become a father who listens, kneels, and stands behind rather than in front. When she finished, the entire hall rose to its feet in applause, not because they saw a woman who overcame adversity, but because they saw themselves in her story, broken, reborn, and choosing to believe again. After the event, they walked hand in hand down the cobblestone path of the nearby park. Leo ran ahead, his laughter ringing through the air like wind chimes. Daniel held Imani's hand. "I used to think I had to lose everything to keep you." Imani smiled softly. "I used to think I'd always be the third wheel in someone else's story. I never imagined I'd be the final chapter of my own. They stopped to watch Leo climb the base of a fountain and wave excitedly. Dad, Mom, let's take a picture. Our whole family. Daniel pulled out his phone. Imani stood beside him, hair tousled by the breeze, her hand laced tightly with his. That photo would later be framed and hung in the center of their living room. No logos, no captions, just the three of them. A slant of sunlight, and a sky that didn't make promises, only showed up. The apartment door closed as evening settled in. But in each of their hearts, another door had been open for a long time, needing no key, no breaking down, just enough love to step through. Family isn't always about being born together. Sometimes it's about choosing to stay despite everything. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to a story that's imperfect, but real. Tap like if this story touched you. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more love stories that are as deep and honest as this one, hit that follow button. Because who knows, maybe the next story will be yours.